Good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the second session of the five-part negotiation webinar series hosted by Manitoba Agriculture and Supply Chain Canada. Today's webinar will build on last week's session and expand on negotiation preparation and identifying your BATNA. I am Annette Allen, Business Development Specialist with Manitoba Agriculture's Value Added Branch, and I will be your moderator today. I will kick off this webinar with a land acknowledgement, recognizing that Manitoba is on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Dakota Oiat, Denesalin, and the Hethouk peoples. We acknowledge Manitoba is located on the homeland of the Red River Métis. We acknowledge Northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. We respect the spirit and intent of treaties and treaty making and remain committed to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. Just a reminder that today's webinar is being recorded and the link will be sent to you after the event. If you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A at the bottom of your browser and we will address them after the presentation. The presenter of this negotiation power series is Rick Reed. Rick Reed is CEO for the Manitoba Institute of Supply Chain Canada. Rick has over 25 years of supply chain experience in both the public and private sectors. He specializes in optimizing supply chains and has helped organizations develop strategies to maximize their efficiency and profitability. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you, Annette, and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for session 2 of our negotiating series. And thank you certainly for those returning that were here last week and for new ones that are here. Takeaways from today's session. We're going to revisit BATNA. Just like I said, we briefly touched on it at last week's session, but we're going to talk a little bit more about the importance of it and some of the framework around it. We're going to talk about bargaining zones, which are critical in any negotiation and being able to identify them. The differences between distributive and integrative bargaining, or distributive or integrative negotiation, or bargaining, whichever we want to call it, and expanding the pie, which is a critical aspect in negotiations, particularly if you're looking for a win-win or integrative approach. I do want to touch on review some of the key things from last session, just to refresh everybody's memory who was there, and for maybe some of the new people that are here in attendance. Negotiation, much of negotiation is about preparation. Successful negotiations can really be attributed to how much preparation you put into it. How much time did you actually go into assessing yourself and your situation and your needs and your interests and your wants, your need to have, like to have, etc. How much you assess the other party, how much do you understand them? What are their needs, wants? What are they, what would they like to have? What are their interests? What's going to motivate them to say yes? Doing your best you can to understand those situations. And how's the situation impacting the negotiation itself? Is one party under stress? Is one not? Is there time constraints? Is there, there's a whole multitude of things that come into it. But it's important to understand that the more you put into these, just as I mentioned last week, the more successful and more confident you'll be going into your negotiation. Probably the one thing that I didn't mention last week, and I probably should mention now, is as you're going through this, you're looking at your aspect, it's all around what's the problem that needs to be solved. Because if you remember, negotiation is that collaborative problem solving, as I mentioned last week. But if you understand the problem and the potential alternatives, better than everybody else in the room, you're in the driver's seat. You're in the best position to guide that negotiation to a successful outcome for yourself. I did talk about Michael Wheeler's 7 basic questions. And these are questions that you really should answer as part of your preparation. As you're going through and you're identifying those things, you should be answering these questions as well. Here we go again. I don't know why it does that. I thought I took that off. But what are you going to do if the parties don't agree? Who are the real parties? What are their interests? How can value be created? Obstacles? What's the right thing to do? These are questions that somebody should be answering as they're preparing for a negotiation. Issues, alternatives, and we're going to get into this today. This was up there. I brought it up. It's a slide from last week. The reason I brought it up is we're going to be talking a lot about these things now this week, about how you identify multiple issues. Don't focus on one thing. How do you bring more things into the discussion? Identifying alternatives for the issues, using these things to create packages, and what your offer is going to be, or your trade-offs. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about this stuff in today's session. Correct. So BATNA, as we mentioned last week, BATNA is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. This is the most critical thing. And unfortunately, most people, when they go into a negotiation, haven't really thought about this. It's almost like that drive-by negotiation you see in the movies where people get back to forth and they banty back to forth and then somebody concedes like right away. Well, that's not real life. When you're going into a negotiation, it can be anything from acrimonious to, easy to go because there's, everything seems simple, or people, it's not that important to them, so they let you win. Um, it's really important though, when you go into negotiation, you have to understand what your alternative is. Because if you don't understand what your best alternative is, you're going to end up in a situation where you might be agreeing to something that's worse than what your alternatives are. You might be putting yourself in a worse position. And you have to understand, just as it says on there, that it changes. As more information becomes available, your BATNA can change. It could get better, it could get worse. Now, I'll go back to that example I used last week when I talked about the empty lift assists. Um, if you look at the timeline of what happened, I had the salespeople come to me and say, we're getting screwed on this price for these empty lift assists from what was essentially a single source supplier because the other alternatives weren't that good of quality, not good enough to go on our trailers as far as we were concerned. And they said we have competitors selling it for less than we're buying it for. And so, like anything else, like any other situation like that, as the supply chain manager, I contacted the supplier and asked them to come in to have a conversation about it. So the gentleman, the supplier came in, he was there, and we got talking away. I said, yeah, I had the evidence there about what it looked like people were doing. And I said, we buy a lot of these units every year. Like we're putting hundreds of these on our trailers every year, and we're seeing evidence here, that we're not getting the best price, and we would like to know what we can do about that. Well, the guy was up on his chair, and it flipped over, and he was swearing at me and calling me a bunch of names, and I thought I might get myself punched. But basically, it went from, the nerve to ask about, hey, we need to get a better price because I think we deserve it, to all of a sudden, a potential fight to, that's it. I'm gonna raise your prices 10%. So by the time he left, we had at least talked him out of the 10%, but we hadn't resolved the price situation. It was still the same price. And the reason being is I couldn't really do anything about it because my alternatives sucked. Like the other two alternatives that were available on the market were poor quality, not something that fit with our strategy and our value proposition for the trailers, having the best engineered trailer in the market. And so my choice was, okay, grin and bear it, right? And just deal with the fact that we're going to have a higher price on this thing. My alternative, I go to a cheaper option, which is cheaper quality, which is not going to help us with our brand, or so basically do nothing. So basically, in that situation, my alternative was weak. I didn't have good alternatives. I had two cheaper, poor quality things that didn't fit with our brand and wouldn't go good. So my alternative was weak. So what did I have? What's my option? I got to stick with what I got. I really didn't have any power in that negotiation. So what did I do? I did exactly what line two did. I said, well, let's start figuring out. As I explained, we looked at the parts and we built our own. And the cost was going to be about $700, but it looked like hell. And there's no way a trucker was going to put that on a trailer. And so then we said, well, most of the parts came from one supplier who we knew also did component work for New Flyer and MCI buses. So they could do these kind of things well. And then they came up with a new unit that looked better than even the one we were buying. And the cost was $1,700. So then when we had that supplier come in again, the next time, right, we're in a position where I'm talking about, I need this price to come down. He still got angry, but all of a sudden I was in a position, well, if you can't get it down to $1,700, essentially, my alternative is $1,700 for a better unit. So if you can't do that, but I'm probably about a year away from production. But if you can't get that down to $1,700, I'm going with the other guy. So now I was in a position of power because I improved my BATNA. And that's what you need to be doing. Like, that's the power of BATNAs, is you don't always have strength right off the bat, but you need to be looking at your alternatives. But only something objective. You can't say, well, if I said, so if I go back a bit, when it says only objective evidence can change a BATNA, I had it in this case because we had actually gone and done the work and come up with the alternative. Some people say, well, what's your BATNA? Well, I'll just go to the other, I'll just go to the competitor. Well, that you don't have that deal. You don't know what that deal is. You don't know if it's better. Saying you're going to go do something is not objective. So you have to make sure that when you're looking at your alternatives, it has to be available to you. You have to know what the details are. You have to know it. It has to be tangible. You have to know what it is. And that, because as I said, your BATNA is your reservation point. Because as soon as I had that better quality unit, the better looking unit for $1,700, that became my walkaway point or my reservation point. So that this guy, he's at 3,600, my alternative is 1,700. Anything in between, my alternative is better. So unless he came in at under $1,700, the best thing for me to do is to walk away. And that's what we were ended up doing. Is that the price came down, so short term we had something, but in the end we were moving over to the other unit because it was my best alternative. So that's where they can be really powerful, but you have to invest your time in it. But you need to look at what are all your alternatives. You have to look at what your alternatives are. And you have many. You can, change something. You can go to a different supplier if it's, for certain things. You can do nothing. You can, like, what is your alternatives? You have to look at each one of them. And, the best thing to do is typical brainstorming is don't consider them. Just get your team together, throw it on a whiteboard. Don't discuss them yet. Just get them up there. And then once nobody has anything else to throw up, then evaluate each one of them, right? Take a look at which one is, and then from there, which one's your best one? Which one is the best alternative? Which puts us in the best position in terms of supply assurance or cost or whatever it happens to be? And then once you know what that is, then analyze what can you do to improve it, similar to what we did, right? Invest the time is what can we do? Well, can I go back to the supplier? If I change volumes on something, can I get a better price? Can I adjust the design on something? Like, what can you do? What's in your control that you can improve your BATNA and change the conditions of what's going on? And then once, as I said, once you've established it, it becomes your reservation price. Now, just to give an example here. So for some of you, again, just to help again to illustrate that. So you're coming around, you decide that you want to go buy a new car. Something that everybody just loves to do, going to buy a new car. So what are your alternatives? Well, your alternatives, I could keep my current car, right? That's an alternative, and it's working well. I can do this. So I can keep my current car. I can go around and I can go get quotes from competitors for something similar. So I can go to Nissan, get a quote on a Rogue. I can go, or a Nissan Kicks. I can go to Toyota to get one on I'm not sure, a RAV4, I think it is. You can go to Honda and get a CRV. The three you can go to get those things, and then you can go to Chevy and you can go get one on whatever their equivalent is. But you can go get quotes from competitors and have them in your pocket, before you go back and negotiate with where you think you're going to go. So again, then you know what your alternatives are. You know what the best alternative is in terms of price, in terms of quality, in terms of features, and whatever swag they're going to give you. You could say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna take public transit from now on, right? You could say, you know what? I'm gonna take Uber. I'm not gonna buy a car. I'm gonna use Uber when I need it. So these are alternatives, right? And the question becomes like, what is the best alternative for you if you can't come to an agreement on that new car? So and then you're gonna analyze things. Like if I keep my new car, okay, it's great. No, I don't have payments, but I have maintenance. So what does my maintenance cost look like? How much is it costing me to maintain this thing? you know, what's the actual life of this thing? What does it do if I'm somebody that needs it for work and I drive around? What does it help me look professional when I show up in a car that's rusting half out or something like that? Like you're going to look at all the factors around the costs of keeping the current car, and that's going to give you a number. And you're going to know, so you'll be able to compare that number with, the number it's going to cost you to either lease or buy a new vehicle. You're going to have your quotes, right? Saying, you know what, I'm going to go get my quotes. And I have one here where I can get this Honda, that's got all these great features and all the warranty, and I got all those things you're looking for, and I get it for this price, and it's $200 biweekly, right? Well, guess what? If that's one where you like it and it's a great alternative, and that's the price, that means that you're looking at the Chevy one. They're going to have to get a lot more features, or it's going to have to be cheaper than $200, yeah, for you to go because your alternative is $200 plus this. So for you to go over here and get the one from the Chevy, you're going to have to either have it for cheaper than $200, or you're going to have to get a lot more features. So you start looking at those things. It gives you a place where you can actually confidently say, you know what, the other deal is better. I'm going to go there. And that's what gives you power in negotiation. The stronger your alternative, the stronger your BATNA, the more power you have in a negotiation. So let's take another example on that. And let's use something real world that we're all seeing every day in the news. As you have a negotiation, coming up with Canada, Mexico, and the United States for CUSMA. And, we're going into this negotiation, with a entirely different set of circumstances than we did the last time around. In the sense that we have, a party that's outright hostile in some ways, right? And is keen on using the leverage against us. So the question becomes, what are our alternatives? And when you look at the alternatives, we don't have a lot in some ways, just because we're so integrated into the United States. So that's part of the why I think you see the Prime Minister has been for the last year, and he continues going around trying to create alternatives. He's trying to strengthen our alternatives so that when we go into negotiation, we have more power. We're on more equal footing. We're not going to be entirely equal, but the thing is, it's all relative. But I can see what he's doing is trying to create a better alternative, to increase our leverage in that negotiation so that we can not just accept what's given to us, where we actually have options where we can go, doesn't mean it's going to be great, but where we can actually go and have a path forward that doesn't require us just to say, yeah, okay, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. So that's what is important when you look at your own negotiation is how do I ensure that I have strong alternatives to put me in the best position to negotiate the best outcome when I go into a negotiation itself. So you're going to talk about couple different types, and it's important to understand this, because it's easy to fall in. You could go in thinking that you're going to be, focused on win-win, and I'm a nice person, and I want equitable, and I want that. But things can really degenerate quickly, or they can really shift, and you really may not know it. But there's a couple types of negotiation or bargaining, whatever you want to call it. Distributive negotiation, often called win-lose. This itself, again, you know, borrowing from our current events. This is Donald Trump. Like Donald Trump doesn't believe in win-win or mutually beneficial agreements. Donald Trump believes in, I win and you lose. And unfortunately, you're going to run into a lot of that, as you negotiate, and you have probably run into a lot of that in your negotiations, but you will continue. There's always going to be somebody that's their go-to approach. But basically, the definition I just sort of went up there, and it's pretty straightforward. It's basically there's a fixed amount of value, and basically the war is over how do I maximize how much I get and how much you get. But generally, it's one party, comes out ahead and the other doesn't. And it's often determined by who has power in the relationship. Who has the most power, who has the best BATNA, who has the most power in the relationship, who can dictate the things. And that's kind of where, our struggle is going to be in this upcoming review is, the United States has a lot of power and a lot of leverage on this, and they're going to use it and, to try to maximize what they take. So it's going to be a very difficult thing, but this is exactly what it is. It's generally a win-lose where, one party wins and the other one loses. So when you're in a situation, this is kind of related because, um, when I talk about preparation, I talked about assessing those things, but now we're just kind of a next level of that prep. You need to be thinking about bargaining zones. And I don't know if everybody's necessarily the thought of it, when they go into negotiations or is aware of this term or aspect to it. But basically, you can have a positive or a negative bargaining zone. And it's very important early on in a negotiation to figure out which one you're in. And because, if you don't do that, you may end up wasting a lot of time and money and potentially, coming up with a poor outcome. Because you get into this thing, I need to make a deal, but it ends up making a deal at all costs. And surpluses, we'll talk about what surpluses are in a sec because it's related to this. But let's go on to here. But a bargaining zone, the best way is maybe to illustrate this. This is a positive bargaining zone. So if I'm Hardware Inc., you can see the guys on the left. What they are is, they want to buy an item from Acme. They want to buy the item. They want to buy it at 75 cents, but they're willing to go to a maximum of $1.35 for this part that they're looking at. So I want to buy it for 75 if I can get it, but if I can't, I'm willing to go up to a maximum of $1.35. But now you look at Acme, he's the seller, and he's going, you know what? The lowest price I'm going to go is $1.05. And what I'm trying to sell it for is $1.75. So when you look at the screen, you can see here, there's an overlap, right? There's an overlap. And so theoretically, again, this is price. This is just one factor, and there's usually more than that. But on price in this situation, theoretically, there is a likelihood that there is a deal possible because there's an overlap of the ranges, right? This guy, hey, he's not going to get 75 because the lowest this guy's going to is $1.05. But $1.05 is still less than his maximum and vice versa. He'd like to get this, he's not going to get it, but this isn't there. So there should be a deal available somewhere between $1.05 and $1.35. So this is a positive bargaining zone. And this is on price, but you're going to see this on other factors. It might be on, delivery, might be on quality, might be on warranty. Like it's not just a single thing. There's bargaining zones on a number of different issues, and you've identified them when you did your self-assessment and assessment of the other party. Now, for you all sharp-minded people, then you probably already figured out what a negative bargaining zone is. So this situation, as you can see, this is what I want. This is the maximum I'm willing to pay. Meanwhile, Acme saying that's the lowest I'm going to go, and that's what I want to sell it for. There is no overlap. And because there's no overlap, there really isn't an opportunity, unless something significantly changes, there really isn't an opportunity for an agreement here. The problem in negotiations and what happens when you don't go in preparation and you're not doing this, and you're not only have you looked at the party and yourself and the situation, but you've also started thinking about, okay, how am I going to go start to learn the things that I don't know, right? How am I going to confirm things that I don't know? This is one of the first things you need to do, is you need to try to figure out, am I in a positive or negative bargaining zone? Because if you're in a negative one, my advice is just shake hands and then move on, right? Because you could end up beating back and forth trying to get some sort of crossover here, but it's very hard to do. and you're end up wasting a lot of time and energy, and you might end up hurting some feelings or maybe some prospects for long-term relationships, because sometimes the fact is there just isn't a deal. So it doesn't mean that you can't come back to it at some point if circumstances change, if there's another factor, if whatever happens. And it doesn't mean you can't have questions about, hey, well, what can we do? If I'm in this situation, hey, maybe there's no deal now, but maybe you have a post agreement where you say, hey, let's work with you guys. What can we do to get this price down? Why is that price there? Right? But I wouldn't be if you identify that you're kind of in a negative bargaining zone, I wouldn't waste a lot of time. I'd go find somebody where you know, where there's a better opportunity to come up with a successful outcome. Because this can be, it can be very frustrating. If you don't do this, it can be very frustrating negotiation because if you don't figure this out, you're just back and forth, and you really don't get to the answers. Especially if you're in a distributive negotiation, or if you're distributive bargaining where it's win-lose, where both sides are trying to pressure their side into agreeing to their position. It gets very frustrating in that situation. Now, a surplus is just basically the difference between the settlement price and the reservation point. So in this case, I'll just come back here, right? So settlement price and reservation. So we'll go back to here, right? So if this guy's so this guy his reservation point was $1.05, right? If it ended up over here, that's his surplus. If it ended up at $1.25, it would be something like that. So basically, it's wherever your reservation point is. You know, Same thing here. Like it's going to come down whatever the difference is between your settlement point and what your walkaway was. That's the surplus. Does it really make a big difference? Not really. Sometimes people look at it to just they use it as a measurement to feel if they had a successful outcome. Honestly, I throw it in there because it does come up, but um, I don't use it a whole lot. I don't know a lot of people that do. It's more about, the biggest thing to kick out of that is really, is to very early in a negotiation, try to figure out if you're in a positive or a negative bargaining zone so that you're not wasting your time or if you have a chance to go forward. Again, strategies, because again, this is about splitting up a pie. There's a very limited sum, and unfortunately in distributive, one of the things you got to be careful of, and you'll know that you're kind of getting in away from win-win, and we're going to talk about win-win in a sec, but you're into a win-lose kind of negotiation is when it comes down to usually one issue, usually price, and you get hammering back and forth and you got to be careful about that. Usually the best thing to do when you start finding that, hey, geez, we seem to be bashing this thing back and forth is, well, why, start asking questions instead of fighting, start asking some questions. And we'll talk about active listening and some of that here in a minute. But that's where you want to start saying, well, what needs to change on this? Like, why do you need that price? What has to change? You know, how could we do this differently that addresses your issues? And because again, if you don't get to those issues, if you don't address the issues, you're not going to get to a successful outcome necessarily. So, what I'm talking about is kind of starting to move to win-win, more collaborative, but it's hard sometimes. Sometimes the momentum gets going and emotions get flaring and you're going, well, I'm not gonna, and you got to be careful about that because it can really get you in trouble. But strategies, what you want to do is always assess, always improve your BATNA. Again, just because you go into it doesn't mean it doesn't change during the negotiation. New information is going to change it. New alternatives, something comes, alternatives come up. The people you're negotiating with may change something. They may bring something up that improves your BATNA for you, which helps get you to an agreement. But always be assessing, always be improving your BATNA as best you can. Because as I said, the stronger your alternative, the more power you have and the ability to walk away. That's where your real power is the ability to walk away, to a better alternative. Know what that is. Know what that walkaway point. Know your reservation point, and keep it secret. Don't ever share that with the other party, or keep that to yourself. Know that just within your team, and make sure your team knows not to share it as well, because doing that is going to give the other party power in that negotiation, because then they start playing around it. So always keep this thing secret. Research the other party's BATNA. Now, they should be keeping it secret too, but not everybody's always prepared. And you know what? Sometimes with good questioning or um, observation, you can kind of get a pretty good idea where you think it is. Something else I'll say is, when you're going into negotiations, it's not always just, okay, I have to go negotiate this now and the process starts now. What you should be doing is you should be gathering information on those parties, especially if somebody you're doing business with, doing your best to gather information all the time. You should always be, whenever you can, asking questions. And again, because people, when they go into negotiation, all of a sudden they get guarded and then they clam up on sharing. But if you're months away from it and you're just going to do a facility tour, for example, and hey, how does that work? What do you do? Well, does that reduce your cost? How does that impact your cost? How does this, has that made you more efficient? Like you can go take, oh yeah, it made us more efficient, 33%. This new equipment made us 33% more efficient. Well, more efficient means that my price per unit should be coming down because you'd be doing more or less. Again, you don't mention that there, but you just note it away, going, okay, they're getting savings on the new equipment. It improved them 33%. Or you see, hey, we got, that's a lot of stuff. Yeah, we do this, we do this because it helps us get the price down because we're buying, in these kind of bulk and this. Oh, okay, so they're doing that in there. That's a key part of what I get. So what you're looking for is you're looking for those tidbits that give you a glimpse into their cost structure or their efficiencies or those other, streams, because it's going to give you a way to help calculate where you think that reservation point is. And then when you actually get into the negotiation, you're going to ask questions. They're going to try to, okay, I think it's here. Let's start asking our questions to try to narrow it down to see if I'm right. And the other thing is about share of the pie is you want to set um, high but realistic expectations. When I say that is when you're in a distributive negotiation and it's very much, this. Unfortunately, you need to. It's the old adage. Yeah, you know what? Don't start here. Start here with the ask and come down. Because if you have to come down, don't want to start at your you don't want to start at your target points necessarily. You want to start up and come down to them because again, the other side's going to be the same thing. But make sure it's within the realm of sensibilities. Like if you're looking for something that doesn't make sense, people are going to just not take you seriously. But make sure that it's high, but make sure it's realistic. And then it's easy to, as you see what the other side's doing, then you can bring it down to something a little bit more where you think the agreement's going to be. It's really about information at that point. How do you gather information to know where you stand? Prepare and make the first offer. This one is when I'm doing this in a workshop, we have lots of discussion around this. And yeah, I usually do a show of hands who likes to make the first offer and who doesn't. And usually it's most of the people, usually about 3/4% say they don't. They want the other side too. Um, this I would suggest that you um, rethink that. Doesn't mean you have to, but I think I would suggest you rethink that when you're on that because I always try to make the first offer. I always try to open it up. It doesn't mean that I come up and I say, "Hey, I want to have it for this price and this delivery." I'm not talking that. But what I usually do is um, I like to number one, I like to open the discussion. I like to present the problem from my point of view. I like to when we sit down and we get talking, I do like to lead off by describing the problem from my perspective and what I feel the potential solution to, or what I feel the best solution to that problem is going to be, what the best alternative is, in a sense. And then I finish off with, how can you help me? So I might say, yeah, we have this problem with the inventory. We seem to have an awful lot of inventory. We've never seen the right stuff. And so, we're looking at how can we arrange maybe a buyback of some of our slower moving stuff where we, in return, we would increase, some purchases of the higher moving items. Um, would be, what we're going to be trying to do. But we really need to get our inventory down to help with cash flow and help with velocity of our retail items. And I'm really looking to see how you guys can help us do this. And the reason I like to open up and I'd like to start that way is because then everything they come at, they have to present it in the framework of how I've done that. It's my framework. So it's not, they have, whatever they're presenting has to fit into how I describe it. So then I have the ability to say, well, that doesn't quite that doesn't quite solve my issue. So whatever they come at me, I can say, hey, it doesn't, but what if we did this? What if we did that? Because they basically everything they do becomes in the context of, how I presented the problem. And that gives you control, right? It allows you to kind of guide that conversation because everything bring to you has to be in the light of how does it fix the problem as you described it. And if it doesn't, you could say it doesn't, or it doesn't quite there. And then you can start making suggestions about, well, what if we did this? Well, how about this? What if you did this instead? Hey, this is good, but what if you also did this to include it and it would really help with this? How would that work? For you. Like you get to start to see what their capabilities are. So, you know, it's not only just present the problem and open up and start the discussion where you're kind of controlling the information coming in, whether it fits or not to help solve your problem. But also, it also comes down when you start looking at alternatives, when you do get into details about price and delivery, like those factors, is it's the same methodology, is that you present the hypotheticals. And what I usually do is on that first offer, and we're going to talk about multiple concessions as we get on, but I would generally do, well, we can either do this or this. I mean, which one would you be thinking? Which one would be more appropriate, more attractive to you? But we'll talk about that in the next section. But making the first offer gives you control, helps you guide the conversation to the outcome that you're looking for. Um, as opposed to them doing it, and all of a sudden now you're having to fit your square pegs into the round holes over there, or whatever it happened. Like it all of a sudden now you're trying to get fit into them, and as rather than them trying to fit into you. So to me, it's a tactic that helps you have control over and guide that conversation. Immediately re-anchor if they do. Now, re-anchoring in negotiation is where you shift it off. Somebody might come out and they might throw an offer at you. They might, kind of present the problem. You know, Re-anchoring is acknowledge it. Like, don't say, "Oh no, that's no, you're freaking loony." No, we said, "No, I appreciate that. Thank you. That sounds interesting. I think I need to think about that some more." However, before we get into that, I really need to get this solved first, and then so what I would do is if they beat me to the punch on that, I'd acknowledge and say, yes, I think I think we should be discussing that. However, before we start with that, I really think we need to solve this issue with delivery and really get into because the delivery is causing me issues here, 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 and here, and here. And I can't have this unreliability in the delivery. How can you help us fix this? So what happens is I acknowledge it. Say, yeah, we're going to talk about it. But you know what? Boom. And I come over and I re-anchor and I redirect over in an area of which I get to basically make the first offer in a sense. And now we're in talking about my issue. We're talking about, you know, the problem from my point of view and how they're going to help me solve it. And then you get to be the gatekeeper of what works and what doesn't. And then what works, and you can work on refining it to see how you can come up with something. So re-anchoring is a very effective tool to help keep that conversation going in the direction where you are. And planning your concessions. You guys last week when we did the T chart, and it was need to have, like to have. This is where you start planning your concessions. Is that if you have a biggie, if you have something that you need to have out of somebody, then the question is, okay, well, what am I going to do? I need to offer something of equal or greater value, So then that's where you look at the like to haves. What can I give them? What do I have on here when I think what they need to have, what they would like to have, what do I have here that I'm willing to give up that's on their like to haves? More importantly, what am I willing to give up that's on their need to have? But if I'm going to give them something, if I'm going to give one of their needs, I need something of equal or greater value back. So you need to start thinking about what you're willing to trade and what you're willing to trade it for. Right? And you want to make sure that if you give something away, that, as I said, you're getting something of equal or greater value back. So you really need to be thinking about, and this is where the prep comes in, it's so important. What are they capable of doing? What are they willing to do? What are they not willing to do? What if they're not willing to do something, what would it take to get them off that position? What would I have to give them? Am I willing to give it? Right? And then it becomes, when am I going to give it? Like, when am I going to offer this stuff? Like, to get the maximum value. So you need to be thinking about concessions and not only what you're going to concede, but when you're going to do it to help get yourself the best result. And again, we talk about this. I just mentioned this. What do I need to have? What do I like to have? You do the same for the other party. And again, when you know what they need to have, and if you can help solve this, that's a value for you. So if I'm going to give you one of those things, then I'd like to look at what do I need? If I'm missing a need, I'm going to go take a look at them, see if I can get it out of them. Or if I can't get a need, I'm going to see if I can get a whole bunch of these to come back. And when you think about it, and I'm going to go to a different example on this. And I used to coach soccer, youth soccer. And I don't know if any of you are involved in that, but youth soccer parents can be a little crazy as just as much as hockey parents. But my issue is that I was coaching a club team and we had a parent and his wife that figured they should have been in my role. And so I was picked by the club and they just started causing all sorts of trouble. And then they said, I've got enough people for another team and you should let me coach a team. And they agreed. Turns out he didn't have the players and like it was a kind of a silly mess. But what he also did on a regular basis while this was going on is he was coming out to our games and our practices and he was talking to parents and he was trying to get people to say, hey, I don't want to go there. I want my kids to come over to this guy. And a lot of drama, unfortunately, for really a shame when it comes to just kids soccer. But what happened is that um, we got into a situation where then another guy came in and doing the same thing. So now we had three people. So I'm the coach of the one team, and these guys have these they want to have their teams, and so the club said, yeah, we're going to accommodate. We're going to have three teams. And then what they did was the players that weren't already on my team, they split them up. They came up and said, okay, here you go. Here's the teams that are split up. And then they said you have to be three competitive teams. So Rick, you're going to have to give up some players to the other guys to make sure we got three competitive teams. So what I did was I took a look at this, and one of my needs I wanted to have a team that was cohesive, where I didn't have, cliques within my team. And what I was seeing was I had two of my better kids, um, that were no longer warming up with other players. They were only stay to themselves. They wouldn't associate with everybody. Like I was getting this, I was having had this clique within a team. And their parents were the ones that were some of the more vocal ones causing all sorts of headaches. And I knew that the parents of those two kids wanted to play on, I'll just pick a name, Joe, you know, Joe's team. And I know that Joe wanted him. But then you have the other guy, let's call him George. He had a daughter and then her two best friends, but her two best friends were on Joe's team. And so he wasn't happy. And he wanted to get the two friends that were on Joe's team. Joe wanted the two on my team. And so we're getting ready and we're supposed to go have a meeting to decide how we move players around for competitive balance. And so what I did was in preparation when I talk about BATNA is I went out to the tryouts because we had tryouts for club. And so I'm the only coach out of the three of us that went, out of the three coaching teams, I'm the only one that went to the tryouts to evaluate all the new people coming into the age group. And I was part of the evaluating all the new players in this. And so I knew about all the skill sets of all the new players coming in. I identified three players that I wanted to have that were in the top ranked top five. And so I went into this meeting and everybody they're all hopped up. And again, they were expecting this and they're expecting me to be, really protective. I'm going to give you poor players. I'm not going to give you my best ones because everybody assumed that I was all about winning and I was going to behave the way they were. But instead I said, hey, before we get started, guys, I just want to say that I believe that we should have competitive teams. And before we get going, I just want to make it known that these two players are available. Like I think that we should move them, that I'm willing to give them up to go to another team to help do that. And then they're all sitting there looking at me and they're kind of surprised. And they're going like, what? Okay, what's going on? I said, so they're available, but I just got an idea, guys. What if I gave you these two players? Right? What if I gave them to you? And then you gave up these two players, you give these two to George, right? Because I know that he wants to play, they want to play with, their friends. So what if I gave you these two, you gave up those two to George? And all of a sudden, these guys, they're going, oh, everybody's going, well, yeah, 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 yeah. And then, of course, as they're getting all excited and they're starting to see the picture and thinking, hey, we're going to pull one over on this guy. I said, hold on, but I'm willing to do this under one condition. And they all looked at me and said, and then I pulled out the list. And I said, I get these three players. And I pulled out the list from the evaluations. And Everybody's going, well, yeah, yeah, yeah. The only guy that caught on something was happening was Joe, because he was sitting there going, well, wait a second, it's two assistant coaches. So no, no, yeah, we agree. And basically, so I ended up getting rid of two problem childs. I helped out another guy over here, and I got three quality players that more than replaced what I had. And it was all about understanding the problem. It was understanding the people. It was understanding the situation to get to a successful outcome. And what happened was the deal was agreed to before they even knew what the heck going on, because they jumped in because they weren't prepared. They were just so focused on one thing. I gave them what they wanted and ended up taking, my alternative was better to have than three other players. So I hope I haven't kind of jumbled that in the explanation, but it shows the importance of understanding the other parties, their needs, their interests, what your alternatives are, how do you do things, and it comes up to successful outcome. And we ended up winning cities that year with the new players. They were an integral part. So you need to really do your homework on people, on the situation, on all those things, so that you can come to a successful outcome on that negotiation. I hope I didn't just confuse the hell out of everybody. Yeah, other strategies when you're looking at use rationale that appears objective, kind of what I did there, because I said, hey, we'll do this and this, and I'll take these three players. I mean, again, I knew it was a good deal for me. They didn't do any research. They didn't know for sure, but the rationale made sense to them and they jumped all over it. Right? So that's about preparation. The norms of fairness. I did the same thing in that negotiation. Like again, well, you know what? Yeah, here's two really good players. Here's two good players going that way, and I'll take these three, rooks off the new list coming in. So again, it appealed to the norm of fairness. So again, on the outside, they're looking at it, they were all over it because it did this. And so everybody's thinking, yeah, let's go. In the end, it was a good deal for me. It was better for me in my mind. But in their eyes, it did those first 2 points. And then the other one to be careful on is, and people do this when they fall prey, well, let's split the diff. Like you're going along, and all of a sudden, well, let's just split the diff. Somebody doing that at any substantive negotiation, slow down because you're missing something. If somebody does that, um, you're missing something important. You should probably ask a few more questions, because that's somebody where they think if they do that, that they're, you know, they've got an advantage or something, or it's beneficial to them, and you're missing something. You're probably going to end up leaving money on the table. So when people suggest that, I usually, well, maybe tell me more about this. How about this? What about this? Like I usually start asking more questions, because that's usually a sign that I missed something. And I stop negotiating and I do some more digging to find out if I can figure out what it is. Because usually when somebody does that, sometimes they're just being lazy, like they're trying to get out of the negotiation quick. But quickly agreeing to that, you might end up agreeing to something that's not in your best interest. And if you know your BATNA, you'll know that. So be careful about it, because lots of people do try that. Now, fairness, this is going to come into what's going on. And the reason I bring up fairness is, um, when you're looking at this, and it's more so in integrative, we're going to talk about in a second. Um, when you're negotiating, the thing is that business relationships are most successful when, both sides, have mutual benefit, where there's a strong relationship, where you're mutually beneficial, where both sides win, and you can both succeed over the long term. Now, if you try to get into win lose or in distributive negotiations, and I'm trying to take everything from you, and I'm being aggressive, what you end up doing is end up damaging relationships, and you end up damaging the ability to get that benefit of the doubt or that consideration later. And so you need to be thinking about fairness as you're negotiating. And if part of it is for the other party, part of it's for you, part of it's, make sure that you're not leaving money on the table. But equity makes sense. Like equity is, you know, equity is basically, if I put more into it, I should get more of the benefit. That's equity. So if you're in a partnership and you're putting most of the work into what's going on, then you should, get most of the reward, so to speak. I think people understand that. Equality, everybody has that 50-50. You might be in a situation on needs where you're negotiating, and you might decide that, you know what, the other party really needs this, and it's not, I can deal with maybe having a little less because the other party needs a little more. Um, this might be just because you got a kind heart. It might be because, you want to help something in the community. I've used this when I was buying stakes and bridging for construction when I was with McDermott Lumber. And I shifted from a for-profit company that was kind of giving me the gears and giving me all sorts of issues. But I happened to find a workshop. It was called the PA Community Workshop in Prince Albert. And we had a store there, and it worked. They worked with people with disabilities, and they did woodworking. And it happened to be that I was at the store and I was leaving town, and I saw this thing, and I stopped in to talk to them, and I said, "Well, can you do these stakes and bridging for me?" They said, "Oh yeah." And the price I got was, nearly half of what I was paying for my local guy in Winnipeg. And I didn't even argue about it. I didn't negotiate anything. I said, yeah, great. That's the price you want. Absolutely. And so I looked at it from fairness. I just said, you know what? It's a good thing for the community. I'm not going to negotiate on it. And, I'm still getting a benefit. So I just said, yeah, absolutely. And I started my truckloads from it. So I'm supporting a good cause. It was about needs. It was about helping people that work hard and help keep them employed. And I still made out pretty good. So you might look at needs. Like there's the other side. You might take less because you feel the other side needs a little more. Or you might say, I need to do this temporarily to make sure this key supplier can get through a tough time, and so that I have them long term. Situational, that kind of fits into kind of what I'm talking about. You might make a decision where there's an emergency. Like, look at COVID, how you might have done something different because of trying to get PPE versus, you know, a time when you're not so pressed. Egocentric is really about biases. Like, it's a bias, it's kind of a subconscious bias where you make decisions, you know, uh, thinking that, there's going to be some direct benefit or indirect benefit to you. So, that can kind of play into it. And then conditioned by process is really about people perceive whether something's fair based on the process. Like if you're looking at a process that you're going, okay, that's skewed. Okay, how does well, I use Trump as an example. He's talking about I'm suing the government for damages, and I'm the one that gets to decide, whether I'm going to settle. Like most people are going to look at that process and say that's nowhere close to being fair, right? So, the process, people look at it, if they see a fair process, they'll generally see fair outcomes. But if they see a process that they perceive to be unfair, then they'll generally see that the outcome may generally be unfair or something like that. So that's all it is. Um, Really, the biggest one you find are really here, and just to be careful about, making a deal that, where there might be some personal benefits. Bargaining stances. And the reason I bring this up is just to be aware of them. Like you might have a situation where you have two people that are looking at win-lose. You might have where two people, one's win-lose, one's win-win, and you might have two people that are win-win. The best agreements will come here. The best agreements, the ones that create the most value for parties will come here because you harness the power and the collective competency and the knowledge and the expertise of the parties involved. And generally, science proves that you get better decisions the more people are involved in something for the most part. This one you have to be careful of because you might go into it with a win-win and you might be running somebody that's win-lose. So you do need to be careful about that, and you have to make sure you take that into account. But you have to be aware that the techniques you're gonna use don't always work, and you might have to shift in and out. You can try to pull people to integrative, if you have some power in the relationship, but if not, you have to reciprocate in kind in some ways. If you can try and they're not, you can't you can't do a gunfight with a knife. Like you do need to respond in kind if you can't shift them more to a win-win. So just be aware that these things kind of, the parties as they get into it, understand how they're coming at it is going to really determine how you can come at it. When you talk about those bargaining stances, as I said, you need to make sure that your reference points, like if you're in if you're going to go into this, let's say a distributive negotiation, we'll use labor, for example. If you're negotiating the nurses' contracts, you know, and the doctors have just gotten their contract done and they got a 20% raise, you know, that becomes a reference point, right? You can use that, but set it before you start negotiating, and you want to, and what reference points you use, try to influence those because obviously you're going to want reference points that support your position, but people are going to try to introduce something else, that may be contrary to your position. But try to settle those before you go in because you want to be negotiating the agreement, not fighting over reference points. when you're in the negotiation itself. So do your best to try to identify what those reference points that both parties will use in the negotiation before you start. Be careful though, they can change. New information becomes available. People find some stuff. So you do need to, you do need to anticipate, well, here's the reference points that demonstrate this, but what happens if something comes up that shows something different? How are we going to respond? So you want to be thinking, about how are you, if key things change, what is your response going to be? How are you going to deal with it? You want to be thinking about that so that you're not all of a sudden caught with that dead fish look when somebody drops a bomb on you in a discussion. You're going, right? Like you want to be able to have something, and it might be, yeah, you know what? We've heard that and we're investigating. We'll need to, how about we park this item while we finish the vet because we had heard that too, and we were trying to identify whether it's relevant or not. So let's put that in a parking lot and let's maybe work on some of these things. So that might be how you deal with it. But you want to be careful. You want to have some thought into what if this changes and how are you going to respond? And if you're finding that the reference points aren't working for you, try to find how to change it. If you have something that is, try to find a way, how can you bring it in? Saying, well, what about this? How effective is it? We're seeing this. And again, if it doesn't help you, try to, change it or be prepared to deal with it. But if you have something that supports your position, try to find a way that you can bring it as best you can. So win-win, integrative negotiations or integrative bargaining, win-win negotiation. This is where the best deals are. Now, myself, in my uh, when I first started, I was very much distributive. I was very much I'm going to go and I'm go go go. I'm competitive as all get out, and I was after everything. And what I was finding was, although I was having some success, not all the time, depending on who, it took me a while to figure out where I was having success and where not. I was figuring out when I was the bigger guys and people needed me, I was winning. But on the other side, I wasn't as successful. I wasn't able to bully people as much. And I was also finding that I was having trouble on the regular day to day to have the extras, like the exchange of information or the information sharing, or I was, when I was having trouble with, I needed help on getting a delivery expedite or something, like I wasn't always getting, help because I was going in, my go-to was I'm gonna go be a bully and I'm gonna go, throw a tantrum and they're gonna give me my way. So as I got older and I got a little wiser and I also got a little trained on it, I started to figure out that going in, you know, more open-minded and coming in with a problem, hey, like here's the problem, and let's go solve it together and let's share in the benefits. Um, all of a sudden started getting me better results. I'm still competitive, it's just I've changed my behavior, you know, where I realize that it's the better way to get a better result. But integrative negotiation is basically what it is. It's collaborative negotiation strategy. It's about achieving a win-win solution that's benefits all parties. And if all parties can walk away happy, that's a good deal. The characteristics of this is that there's multiple issues. Like your distributive is often defined as that there's one issue, and it's most often price. Um, but in integrative, negotiation, you have lots of issues. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to have as many issues to find a mix where you can split them up, between the parties so that both parties can walk away happy. So when you think about it, multiple issues, and you do that in your preparation, you have your like to have, need to have, and you've done it for them, and hopefully they've done the same. What happens is you're going to put this all you're going to put all these things into the bowl, and you're going to find a way to pull out. It's like the hockey sticks, on the pickup game. Everything goes in the middle, and the sticks going one way, and you start splitting them up. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify multiple issues, and then you're trying to negotiate a way to split those things in a way that both sides can walk away happy. The nice thing is that you can add issues. Just because you have the issues there, as you go through the process, you may identify more issues, which can easily be put in the pot to be split up as well. You can bring in other parties because sometimes the solution is to bring in another party. Now, it does bring in their issues that are going to go in the pot too. But what happens is sometimes they can be the thing that, you know, is the missing ingredient to help get to an agreement. And parties will have different preferences. But the idea is how can you have enough issues where you can find a way to split it up so everybody can walk away happy. So the key to this is expanding the pie, right? So you're going through that. You're going to want to, build trust. You're going to share information. You're going to do that by active communication or active listening, if you want to call it that, because you want to pull out as much information as you can. What do they need? Why do they need it? And what would they like to have? And why would they like to have it? How does it all fit into the big picture? How firm are they on their stuff? What are they willing to give up? Like, you're going to want to be taking a look at these things. What's the most important thing they need to achieve? But you do this by, and so when you're talking to people and you're open to communication, you're sharing information, you are building trust with the other parties. Asking diagnostic questions. This is a big part of active listening. Is, ask a lot of who, what, when, where, why, how questions. Because there's two things that happen. Number one, they can't be answered with a yes or no. And two, they have to share information in order to answer it. So it's not just asking them, who, what, what about this or how about this or which, it's not just ask a question. It's planning those kind of questions in a sequence that help you confirm assumptions that you may have, to pull out details that you didn't know, to start to figure out whether you're in a positive or negative bargaining zone, to figure out what the hot button issues are. Like, what is it that in their mind has to be there? What are their needs? Has to be part of the agreement, for them to say yes? What's going to motivate them? What are their interests? That's what you want to pull those things out, because the more, you've done your analysis, you're going to have an idea, you think. Some stuff you'll know for sure, but there's some stuff that you think you're right. But that's where you use questions to confirm. And if you start to confirm, you get a clearer picture of what you need to do to get them to say yes. And then you have to make a decision whether you're willing to give them what they need to say yes, and or not, right? But if giving them some concessions gets you to your target point, right, and it's better than your BATNA, then why wouldn't you? Because you could walk away happy in that negotiation. Provide information. Now, providing information, when the key thing here is you want to have control of the room. You want to control the negotiation and where it's going. And providing information isn't a data dump where you throw everything at it. It's about being selective. And this is where the asking the diagnostic questions and the sharing information are tied together. You're going to ask questions. And what you're going to do is, as you hear answers and you start to hear, okay, I think this. Well, okay, now I'm going to share something of mine and I'm going to ask another question. Well, what if I could, you're talking about pricing and to get a lower pricing, you need to see more. So I can do more volume. I can increase our number of units by this much. I think I can increase by this much. So if I were able to increase the volume that I'm purchasing by another 1,000 units a month, how would that impact the price? How would that impact your ability to help me on this issue? So what happens is that you're using your questions, and as you start to get a sense of, okay, there, okay, I think that they like this, then that's when you share information, and that helps move you towards the agreement you want. And then, of course, you do the validation by asking questions again, right, as part of it, to pull out, yes, okay, yes, that's good for them. You might say, yeah, more volume, how, okay, so yeah, so 1,000 units. So what does that do to the price? What does that do to deliver? What does that do to this? So you're pulling out that information, say, okay, that's good. Okay, let's go on to the next issue. Let's go on to the next issue. Like, so you're going to share selective information, not everything, just selective information that moves the negotiation forward to the conclusion you're looking for. And you use the diagnostic questions to help identify what information you should be sharing to help do that. I hope I didn't confuse anybody. But part of what you're going to do with the questions is you're going to try to unbundle your issues, right? So unbundling the issues. This is how you expand the pie. This is how you take an item and you expand the pie, you create more. So for an example, price, right? So you're looking at the price, and this is kind of on the selecting. This is kind of going what I just finished talking about. So price, you're back and forth, and price is an issue. You want a lower price, they want a higher price. You're in a positive bargaining zone, so you know that there's a range in there, but you're talking about price. So the question is, well, we can beat each other back and forth. Well, I want this, I want this. So, so you go, well, it's $1. No, it's $2. No, I'll go $1.05. No, I'm going to go $1.95. And you can go back and forth and maybe you get there, maybe you don't. But as you're talking about price, when somebody, well, I need, what's the price? Well, I need this price. Well, okay, what does that mean? Right? Well, I need this price. Well, what can that be broken up into? Well, price can all of a sudden be broken up or unbundled into a whole bunch of things. I just threw some of them up here. So you can say price, but price all of a sudden brings up an issue of volume. Price is commensurate with quality. So quality becomes an issue. Payment terms might improve. Yeah, I might pay that price, but you're going to give me 120 days to pay instead of 15, right? Delivery and lead times might price. Immediate delivery might get you a better price, right? Longer lead time might, I'm gonna, I have to hang on to it more. I'm gonna jump up on more because I have to sit on it more. Consignments, packaging. What kind of packaging? How do you want it to come? My price breaks based on, hey, if certain volumes, right? I'm gonna get this price, but I hit this volume, I get a reduction. And then I'll get a rebate when I did, and I now buy a new price once I hit a certain target, I get a rebate what I bought. Or, and I hit this one, I get another price break. So right here, just on this is what unbundling issues is that they might be talking price, but you're questioning and everything you're getting down to is, hey, what are my options? How can I break that up? Because now all of a sudden, instead of beating each other over price, how can you split these things up, right? In a way that gets me the price I want. Yeah, I might give you volume, right? I might say, oh, I'll give you more volume, but you need to give me, the payment terms, delivery time, I need a certain quality. Like how do you split these things up? You know, in a way that I can get the better price, you can get a price you need, but we can walk away happy because, some of the issues when you unbundle it can be split up in a way that I can benefit. And this can be done with everything. Like I did this with price. You can do this with delivery, right? It might be delivery. Is it immediate? Is it truckloads? Is it less than truckloads? Is it, courier things? Is it to my place? Is it out to a site? Is it, so you can, again, all of a sudden you can take that and you can unbundle that. You can take anything that's in a negotiation. And what you do is it's like an onion, you pull it back, to find out what are the issues that are around it and how do we get into this? Because there's a reason they want a price. And what is it? And again, when you come into it, this might be, I didn't even put in, it might be suppliers. It might be that they don't have enough volume. That they're not buying the right thing. It might be that they're not efficient. Like you don't know. Like there could be a whole bunch of other things that come in here too. But the idea is a part of your questioning. That's why you ask diagnostic questions, like who, when, where, why, how. Because when somebody's price, well, how did you come to that price? Why do you need that price? What is the biggest issue? What would it take to bring that down? What's the biggest obstacle for you bringing that price down? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to identify what these other issues are, right? These are just obvious. But you're trying to find out what the issues are that are driving that price or driving the quality or driving that delivery or driving that lead time. And the more you pull that out of them, the more you're able to start putting together a package that you can offer them that helps address those issues that's going to motivate them to say yes. Because again, part of what they're going to do is it's not just, hey, I need to make money. They've got an issue. They've got things, they've got obstacles that are preventing them from able to go forward. It's not that they don't want to sell to you. It's just there's obstacles. But if you can identify what those are and help them overcome them, right? You're in a position where you're going to get a better price, they're going to make a little more money and you help them out. That's win-win. Package deals. So again, you come back, like once you start pulling everything apart, once you've kind of gone through this and you started pulling out these things and you start having these issues, you can start making package deals where you can, as you understand the problem from their perspective, you understand it from your perspective, you start to say, okay, here's the alternatives, here's a way that we might be able to give them, what they need without sacrificing ours. You can start putting together package deals where you start splitting these things up on all the issues, these issues that you split up. You can start splitting these up into a package deal that says, well, what if we did this, this, and this? Right? And if we do this, what if we did this? Would you do this? Right? And what happens is that all of a sudden you can start coming up with that package thing where they can get a whole bunch of things and go, geez, this looks pretty good. And it gives me a lot of my needs, some of my likes. Yeah, you know what? That makes sense. And you may go around the edges, but that's where the package deal allows you to get to win-win. It's supposed to price back and forth, where you're beating each other's heads. You break the issues apart and then you find a way to split them up in a package that's more attractive, that allows them to go with and and go and share that with their team and sound intelligent that they didn't get fleeced. Make multiple offers simultaneously. What I like to do on this is I do like to do this, but usually it's not the final one, but it's kind of as we're going along. I like to do this to figure out where bargaining zones are, or where the limits are, or what their hot button issue is. So you might take a situation on this with multiple offers, and I like to contrast them. So I might say, well, you know what? You know, I'll buy 1,000 units, but I want it for $5. Or I'll take it 100 units at a time and I'll pay $6. You know, like, which one of these seems more attractive, or how do those sound to you? And what happens is that it's high volume, low price, or low volume, higher price. Whatever that comes out of their mouth next is going to tell me where their focus is, right? Are they looking for a price? Is it looking for this? Like what? Because they're going to say, well, I want to have the lower number with the higher price. Okay, so how does that fit? How does that fit into what you're trying to do? Like, why is that one more important to you? Why is the lower volume and a higher price? Why do you need that? Because then you have an opportunity to get information as to why they're doing that. Or this, if it goes right to the volume, okay, so why is the volume? Like, do you need more volumes? Like, what does volume do? Does it help you with, getting a better price from your suppliers? Like, how does this all fit? Because you want to find out the motivations why, but what will happen is when you ask those questions, when you contrast, you're going to get a sense of where their hot button issue is and what's important to them, so that you can start pulling out, asking a question, pull more information on why it's important to them and what they need, what you need to give them in order to get them to say yes. So multiple offers are very strong. I usually do it as a hypothetical, but multiple offers are very strong because it does help you focus in on what's important to the other party. Structure contingency contracts by capitalizing on differences. That's kind of like I mentioned before. That might be, what, I can't get the price I need, but you know what? If so, I'm willing to pay that now. But if I get to these levels, I get a discount at that level. And then this one, that's where you work in that step kind of pricing. So that's where you might say, hey, we can't overcome the price, but I can come up with a way that I'll live with this now. But if I hit the volumes I'm talking about, if I hit certain points, I don't want to see a price reduction. And then if I hit another one, I want to see another one. So that's what that sentence means. Pre-settlement settlements, that's kind of, you probably won't run into that very much, but it might be NDAs. It might be, where you're going to be legal jurisdiction, where you're, if you're dealing with, somebody in another province or another country, it might be on which legal jurisdiction that the contract's going to be in. So that's what those kind of things are. So it doesn't come up very much. Post-settlement settlements are, similar to follow-on agreements. It's where you have a real sticking point that's holding up the negotiation, but the agreement is said, let's agree on what we have so far, and let's have an agreement. We're going to go and we're going to work on this, separately now. So it's, again, this one works if you're finding that you have one thing that's really holding it up. This is where you might say, well, what if we, this is in our best interest to go. We have agreement here. Let's conclude this, but with a post-settlement agreement where we're going to start working on this in earnest to see how we can do that. So that's all that is. It's a way to help get you over the hump and to keep moving forward rather than just be stuck on there. So it's a very effective tool for that. Resource assessments, again, this is, again, you're going to take a look at that. It's just kind of an internal, it's part of that self-assessment, assessment of differences between the two parties. All this stuff's pretty straightforward. Offer and trade-offs make sense. Acceptance and rejection is really where you accept. It's where you accept the position of the other party, but you're just going to reject the unreasonable things that they're doing. It's about communication, being clear. And then what you do is if you say, yeah, no, I understand where you're coming from, but I just simply can't accept the terms of what you're saying about for the price and the delivery in that. And in order to go forward, we have to figure out how to do that. So how do you think we can do this? So then you use that as an opportunity to gather more information to see if there's a way to come to common agreement. Prolonging negotiations, this is again, whether you do or not, it depends. That's kind of a time thing. Renegotiation is good. Coming back, renegotiating former deals, doing a review is something that certainly helps. Because what a lot of that happens there is I do that when I'm working with strategic suppliers. Is let's take a look at this deal. Like it was good at the time, but you know what, things have changed, and let's go take a look at how we can go find some savings that we can find a way to split, where you can make a little more money and I can get a little bit better price. We can share in the benefits of renegotiating our deal, and because it's been in place for a long time. So that's all those things are. It's about the thing about win-win or integrative relationship or negotiating is it's about the relationships. Now you're not going to go spend the time on somebody you're spending $100 with a year, but those strategically critical people you're doing business with, you should be focusing here because those are long term. They're in your long term interest to have a good working relationship. That's a good long term relationship to have them be efficient and for you guys to have your supply chains integrated where you have the best price for both of you, so that you can be competitive in the market and do sales. So, that's where the renegotiation of those things that you've had for a while. Um, the key points on this, I'm kind of coming to the end of this, but the key points on this is realize, you know, and I don't have it on, but I say just one, make sure you take the time to figure out whether you're in a positive or negative bargaining zone. Because you're wasting your time if it's negative in most ways. But if you're in a positive one, make sure you're using your questions to figure out if you're in a positive or negative bargaining zone. Use your questions to you plan your questions to gather information to confirm facts you think are true, to confirm assumptions, to pull out more information, right? So that you can um, make sure you're in the best position where you are the smartest person in the room, what's going on. But diagnostic questions also allow you to control the room and control how that negotiation goes through. Use active listening techniques. Um, Diagnostic questions are a big part of that, right? But other things like paraphrasing, reflection. When somebody says something, you paraphrase it back in your own words to make sure you understand. Reflection is basically exactly, you said it back to them exactly what they said to you, so there's no confusion of what's being said. The one I really like using is silence. Um, Silence is a very powerful tool, and if you're not comfortable, get comfortable with silence because there's a lot of times where somebody will be throwing something at me and I just won't say anything. And then what happens is people don't like it and then start blurting out stuff to fill the gap. And sometimes you'll get extra information on that. They'll blurt out some more stuff because all of a sudden they start to panic or they're feeling anxiety and all of a sudden they start blurting things out. And so all of a sudden, sometimes they'll inadvertently share information that's helpful to you. But the big one is use the questions. Unbundling issues is critical to successful negotiate. How do you pull it apart? How can you take something and break it up into smaller pieces to find a way to come up with a better solution to address the issue and find a way to split up the different things? Say, hey, I'll give you more volume, but you're going to give me great, terms or whatever. Like you start trading that as opposed to just price. You can say, hey, yeah, I'm going to give you a volume in this, and you're going to give me great terms, and we're going to do this. You're going to do that. You find a way to split them up. So unbundling is critical, which leads into the package deals. Because if you've done your homework and you've understand your needs and wants, you understand their needs and wants, you understand motivations, you've done your questioning properly, you've pulled out the extra stuff, you confirm things, you have a really good handle on the problem, um, and what needs to happen to make it go, you can offer package deals that give you most of what you're after, and you can give the other side most of what they're after. So active listening, research, preparation, active listening, diagnostic questions, continue to do that process, confirm things, unbundle the issues as you're in that negotiation so that you can start to figure out what's possible, do package deals, make multiple offers. Like I said, usually do it where you're contrasting options to find out what's hot button. Once you understand their hot buttons, then you focus your package deals around, their hot button issues because they're not going to say yes unless you address hot button issues for them. And then that's it. So I hope that was helpful. I hope I didn't, this is kind of awkward sometimes when you don't have people that to take a look at or do our usual stuff, but I hope that I didn't confuse people or mess things up, but I'm more than happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Rick, for another great presentation. We do have some questions. Uh, the first one, the advice you provided about making the first offer is really interesting. I would love to practice these techniques before trying them in a live situation. Do you have any scenarios that you could provide that we can use to practice with?
Um, well, you could probably do it internally. What um, what a lot of people do is they kind of run a simulation internally with their teams. You can do it with your staff. You can do it with your counterparts. Um, about how do you make your offer. As I said, usually the most comfortable way for people to do that is um, to kind of get a good start, as I said, is start off by describing the problem from your perspective and then ask for help. Um, so if whatever it happens to be, I need to reduce this price. I need to improve the quality. I need to, get more, make sure we have more stuff available. Like define the problem from your perspective to them. And they say, hey, and I need your help to address it. We have to find a way to do this, and I'm not sure how to do it. I need your help. How can you guys help? Is usually a good way to start. Um, because what happens is, when it starts to make you more comfortable because you're describing it, it's your story. You've asked for help. They start to share, and it's a lot easier because you can respond to what they're saying, whether it fits or not. And that's probably the easiest way to get started as a scenario. In terms of the offers, it's the same thing as you can practice. Like, you can talk to your team as you're thinking about it. Well, what if I were to do this? This is what I'm thinking. What are we willing to give up? So you can kind of go through the packages with your own team or your own senior management, if you're not the principal. But if you're the principal, talk to your people. Hey, what if we were to do this? Like you guys, what if we were to offer this, this, and this? If we got this, how does this fit? And your team will tell you. So my advice is just talk amongst your team is probably the easiest way first, because they'll give you a reality check if you're reaching too much, um, or not enough. And then, just when it comes to offers, don't make it an offer. Do it as a hypothetical. Like we say, well, what if we were able to do this? What could you do if we were able to do this? What could you do in this area, right? And so you're not saying I'm doing it. You say, well, what happens if hypothetically, if we were able to bump up our volume to this amount? How would that impact the price? How would that impact lead time? How would that impact? Because then you're pulling out information, but you're kind of making an offer, but you're not. And it takes the pressure off too, because then as you make an offer, if there's an offer and then it's accepted, then also, oh my God, then we're actually horse trading now. But if you kind of do it as a hypothetical, it takes the pressure off because then you're not committed. You say, hey, I'm just trying to pull it, I'm just trying to understand, right? And it takes some of the pressure off people and makes it easier going so that when you do come time to say, okay, this is what I'm offering, right? You've already got a sense of where they are and what you're offering is kind of acceptable, right? In some ways, it makes it a little easier. So I hope that's a good answer for whoever asked that one. Um, it's kind of the process you go through. This is where maybe we have to do a follow-up session where we actually do something in person. We get people to practice this a little bit in person, some simulations, because that's usually what we're doing when we're providing this. We're you start to give people a safe environment to go kind of practice some of that.
Next question. You cautioned about falling for the even split ploy. Have you ever used this yourself when negotiating?
Yep. I've, I've done it when I think I've done it when I think they got me, and it's a way that I might be able to get a little bit more out of it. Um, it again, it's usually somebody that it usually comes up a couple ways. It's somebody that's really uncomfortable negotiating and is trying to find any way to end it as quickly as possible. Um, which I look at it and it's not that I'm not empathetic to that, but that's telling me that there's probably money on the table, and that if I continue, it doesn't mean I have to be miserable, but if we keep negotiating, I'm probably going to be able to extract more of either what I need or what I would like to have from the negotiation, because somebody is going to probably be willing to give me concessions just to make it end. So that's one thing. The other one is It's usually somebody that, where I've used it, where, I don't think I can get any more of this because, this is where it is. And so I'm appealing to their sense of fairness that, well, you know what, it's not that, this isn't really a big deal. So what if we just split it? Um, just trying to say, where if I think that it's not important to them, I've tried it where, it gives me a little bit more. Um, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's really about situation. But if you're the one that you've done your homework, that an even split does not meet your BATNA, right? That you have a better alternative than an even split, then the best thing is just say no. It's just that sometimes when they say that, people's heartstrings go, well, yeah, I guess it all depends on who it is, the deal, the situation, the relationship with the supplier is. Sometimes it's okay to let them win. Like if it's a critical supplier and it's not that important to you and you feel the relationship, it's better to give them one. So you got a marker that you can call on later. You might say, yeah, I agree with it, but you just want to be careful because there's people who will try it where if somebody's really goes quick to even split, I usually stop and dig in more because it usually tells me I'm missing something. And it's not, and that's what's really gonna come back and bite you. So, so I usually stop and dig in more to try to figure out what it is that I'm missing and why they're offering that. And if I determine, as I said, it's just somebody that's just petrified and just wants to get it done, then I go a certain way. If it's something where somebody's hiding something that's to their advantage um, that I should be aware of and that's costing me, then I go address that issue at the time.
I had this question myself. Do you have a list of suggested diagnostic questions?
No, I don't. But my advice on that is it's not as hard as you think. Um, because if somebody says, you know, if I say, you know what, I really like winter, right? So if I say I really like winter, the key is asking, what's the first thing that pops into mind? Well, why do you like winter, right? Well, I like it because I like the sun. I like the fact that it's bright blue sky and it's really bright. Oh, so how does that help you? Like, how does that, like, how does that, like, why is that good for you? Why is that important to you? Well, because I like bright. I don't like cloudy, dreary days. I like sunlight. I like the energy. I know it's a little colder, but you know what? So what happens is that the big thing about diagnostic questions is when you're planning on it is you're going to have, there's two ways to go at this. It's one as you're planning your negotiation, you're getting ready to go in and you're thinking, okay, here's the things I think I know that are as fact for the other party. And here's the things that are my assumptions that, that maybe that I don't know here. Like I've got some facts that I think I understand, like I know this about them, but I don't know all the details. So I need to know more. And here's the assumptions I have where I have no basis, just a gut feel. And so what you do is you plan your questions, around how am I going to ask, what question am I asking and what sequence I'm going to ask them in to try to confirm, the facts that I think are true and to try to get information on my assumptions, whether I don't, I'm wrong or whether I'm right. And but you're not going to get 100%. So then what you do is you kind of plan those questions first, so that you can help control how the negotiation goes. But the rest of the time, it's more about what do I hear and what didn't they tell me. So it's about what they say is important. How they say it is important because it's going to give you context, it's going to give you signals on what's important or not. But what's most critical is what they're not saying. And so when you're hear somebody make a statement in a negotiation and you're going, well, okay, then what about this? Okay, this should be relevant. Like, okay, they're talking that pricing or not, but why aren't they talking about volumes? Right? So what about your volumes? Are they talking about quality? Are they talking about so what you're listening for is what's been said, what hasn't been said, what is it that you still want to know that they didn't share, and then you simply just ask the question for what's missing. It's just a natural thing. Who, what, when, where, why, how. Just remember to throw that in front of it. So that somebody's made a statement. Okay, so what don't I know? What do I still need to know? What didn't they share on that? Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. but what about this aspect? Right? How does this fit in? And so it's kind of planning on stuff to make sure that you confirm things so that you know that your assumptions and what you based your negotiation on is correct. But then when you're there, it's really about, really listening to it and asking the natural question that you still don't know. Like people will be talking about, so well, what does that mean? How, so if you have something you're confused, just ask them, hey, what does that mean? How does that fit? Right? And it's really about just making sure that they fill in the gaps when they say stuff. So I hope that helps. But I don't really have a list. It's more of a listening to what's being said, what isn't being, and what wasn't being shared, and asking about it. Because I need to know.
I have a lengthy one for you here, Rick.
No problem.
With bargaining stances, if you want to take an integrative approach, but you read the other party as taking a distributive approach, do you stick with the integrative approach or do you pivot to the distributive to match them?
Uh,
And if so, I'm not done. And if so, do you try to get back to your integrative approach if you can?
um, I try to stay with it. You have to go in kind sometimes. Usually, if I'm trying to go, I try to go win-win. I try to go integrative on all my negotiations. And at some point, you do kind of get into a split because when you actually split the pie, you're kind of being distributive at that point. But the point is, you've got so many issues that you should be able to find a way to split it where everybody's happy is the intent. But if I'm going to integrative and I find somebody that's really elbow win lose, they're really trying to drive. I actually have fun with that. Is I drive nuts because what I do is I usually slow down. Um, somebody like that is usually trying to, go quick. Well, right here it is. And they're trying to ram through and they're trying to go fast. And they're trying to bully you to make the decision before you think about it, and bullying the decision is not necessarily good for you, before you have a chance to think about and realize what you just did. And so what I do when I run into somebody that's doing that to me, where they're trying to force, I actually drive them nuts because I slow down. I start asking more questions, and it drives them bonkers because they're trying to close the deal. They're trying to do this. So, well, I don't know. Well, what about this? Well, how does this fit in? Well, we really need to have this addressed. How is this going to address this? And what happens is, one of two things happens. Either one, they'll continue doing that. Like they'll continue, they'll be stubborn, I keep going, which tells me, I should probably avoid this. It's either, I'll do the bare minimum, I'll flip over and I'll do the bare minimum I need to conclude if I have to do a deal right now. Um, but I'll buy time and I'll make the best deal I can. I'll get into that back and forth and say, okay, no, I'm gonna do this, and I'll just, I can go into that stone cold distributive too. But I just go make the best deal I can, short term, so that I can go work on my alternatives and I can go find something else to do, either a supplier or improve my BATNA to come back and be better prepared. But usually what I find a lot of times, is that if you slow down, you start digging into it and you get into the motivation, because again, part of the questions they do it when I say about, well, how about this? How about that? Well, why is that important to you? I start getting into the motivations and what it is. And sometimes it's just a personality, but sometimes it's that there's something else underlying that they need solved and they're just desperate and they're trying to do something. So, but I find that once you start digging in, it's not uncommon for them to actually come around and start to come off their position and be willing to realize that they're not going to get a deal unless they work with you, right? You're not going to be bullied and do that. So it doesn't happen all the time. So sometimes if you, my advice when you're in it is just slow it down and start asking questions. It drives them bonkers. And if they're all about the win, then what happens is that, if it stays distributive, you could probably extract a few more concessions because all of a sudden they've invested the time in, and then they're going to try to do, if you're of equal power, if they don't have a whole lot of leverage, they're willing, all of a sudden you can probably get some extra concessions out of it. But no, that's my advice, is slow down and start digging into their motivations and why, and but if it ends up just being that just the way they are and they're not going to come off it, yeah, if you have to make a deal, make the best deal you can, get back in, get distributive, make the best deal you can, but start looking for your alternatives as soon as you're done.
Last call for questions. I don't see any at this point in time, Rick.
Oh, well, not good, guys. It's a good time for questions.
Well, I guess they can save their questions for next session. Thank you once again, Rick, for another insightful presentation, and thank you all for your participation today. You will see a short survey pop up on your screen, and I encourage you to fill it in. We do value your feedback, and we use it to guide our work and provide value for you, our clients. Don't miss next Thursday's session, where we will delve into in-room tactics and strategies. See you again next Thursday.
Everybody, thank you for coming.